Okay, so today is Santes Dwynwen Day, the patron saint of love in Wales, and we're going to learn how to draw and paint her in watercolour pencil. So this is the image that I sent you. I only just dropped a pot of water on top of her, so she's gone a bit blurry. I'm working in my husband's office, and because my studio is too cold, and because stuff is not in the same place as it normally is, everything gets knocked over, broken. Anyway, won't be for long, hopefully. So I'm just going to show you how to draw her. So going back to what we did last week with Dylan, a small oval for the face. Draw her portrait rather than landscape like I'm doing, so you can fit her in better. And she's completely face on to you, so roughly split the face into just slightly higher than halfway for this line, and that is where the eyes should sit. So just underneath that line you can put the eyes in, and you should have an eye's width between the eyes and then another eye's width on either side. So effectively it should be 5 eyes across when you're drawing something straight on. This is for a standard eye shape again, head shape rather than eye shape. Yeah, so obviously if you've got a big nose or big eyes, then this would vary slightly, but she's got quite a small nose, so again in half again between this bit and this bit, in half, and that's where the base of the nose should be. Little curves, nostrils, yeah, and rub that line out. These are just guidelines, so rub them out once you're done. And then roughly, again, people's mouths are in different places, but roughly halfway between that line and that line is where the mouth goes. And then you've got a chin. Okay. And you need this space to include the hair, so, and the skull. A lot of people make this bit too small, and then they can't get the shape right, the head right, the forehead right, the hair on, and all that sort of stuff. So as I said last week, I hope you can see that. Yeah, you can see it. I'm just going to zoom in a little. I'm working on an old creased up piece of paper here because we're not going to use it, so I might as well sketch onto it. So if you're drawing a child, I think I remember talking about this last week, what you do is you split it absolutely in half, and this area is what makes a child's face. The children have larger foreheads, so eyes, nose, mouth. Okay, that's the only difference between a child's head and an adult's head, is this section here. And obviously when they're born, their bodies are tiny as well, so that changes things once you start putting bodies on and things. But with regard to just the portrait bit of it, that's all you need. Okay. And if you've been watching the Portrait Artist of the Year on Sky, you may have seen lots of this sort of drawing happening, and there's quite a lot of the artists on that programme that used grids, so on their iPads, or even we use a grid, a homemade grid. You would put your squares, and then you would use that on top of a photograph and copy each square into your face. But with this face, it's so simple. With this picture that I've sent you, it's so simple. I'd really like you to have a go at drawing it yourself rather than tracing it or using guidelines. And then it's just a matter of getting her body right, and the way I would do that is by measuring the head with my pencil. So I put the top of the pencil at the top of the head, and your finger on her chin, and then go 1, 2. So it's just over 2 heads long. So if you do the same with your head, measure your head and then go 1, 2. That's basically the length of her body. So when you draw that, that's where it should end here. Okay, unless you want to put extra habit on her or whatever. All right, she's almost symmetrical apart from her hands, so everything would centre around that bit, her waist, etc, etc. Okay, so have a go at drawing her. Don't forget to add all details, hair, etc, etc. Maybe you could shape her face a bit better. She's slightly thinner in the face than that one. Have a go at drawing some faces, and like I said last week, if you're drawing somebody from the side, you just narrow this oval like that, add the skull on, big circle, this is where the neck comes down, and then you just put the lines in front. So you put this line goes there, and then you divide up. So your eyes go here, your mouth, your nose goes here, and your mouth goes halfway between that mouth and that one. Okay. All right, so your jawline would be there, your ear would be there. The ear, by the way, goes in this gap here, and your ear is always the same length as your nose. So this length here is the same length as your ear. Okay, so that's that drawn. The next stage you'll see I'll have drawn it out, and we'll start to fill it in using watercolour pencils. But what I want to do first is just show you a couple of things to do with your watercolour pencils. Now I've just got a scrap of watercolour paper here. I'm just going to draw some squares on, and I just want to show you how these watercolour pencils work. Okay, some of you may have done this before, some of you may not. So I'm going to use dark colours so that you can see. So if you colour in like this, so that's just one layer. I'm just going to get a paintbrush. Single layer of colour, water. That's what it looks like, okay? That's a single layer. Let me just write that on so you can layer. Okay, so now we're going to do a double layer, and this means that you lightly colour one direction, and then if you go in another direction and go over the top, that is called cross hatching. Okay, and it will increase the depth of tone on that section. So again, just go in with you, and you can see it's darker. Yeah, so cross hat, oh, pencil, I need a pencil. Cross hatch double layer. Okay, I will photograph this and send you a copy. Now, so what happens if you want to mix a green and you haven't got a green? So take a yellow and a blue, right? So again, experiment with your colours. This is yellow, and then this is a blue. This is like a cadmium blue, I think, or a cobalt or something, over the top. Now with a coloured pencil, you would just leave it like that. But with the watercolour, you need to put the water on and it will mix together, and hopefully it will make a green. Yeah, there you go. So again, the greens will vary according to what yellows you use and what blues you use. So mix green, yellow plus blue. Okay, so use your colour mixing knowledge and mix some bits and bobs. A gradated colour, or a graduated colour, some people call them. So let's go for a dark green. So I've got 3 pencils, right, all different greens. We start on the left with the dark green. Oops, this one needs a bit of a sharpen. These are my daughter's pencils because mine are up the back in the studio and it's absolutely belting it down. So I didn't want to go up there, so I just borrowed Layla's. She comes in useful, I tell you. And they're homeschooling at the moment, so she's even in and I can ask her questions. Right, so then you just blend, right? You should start with the lighter tone, really. Let me start that again. Start with the lighter tone and work towards the darker tone. So get the lighter tone moving and then move along to the darker. And you should see that they blend, they should blend into, so you get a gradated or graduated colour. Okay, now next one is wet the paper. Wet the paper first. Normal water. Let's change colour. Let's go for this red and drop the colour in. Now you will see that this is not quite as harsh as putting it down like we did up here, and you can see it's sort of melting. So if you want a sort of in between, so you want some texture and some sort of bled colour, then that's what you can do. So that's wet paper first. Okay, same pencil, and I'm going to take some water and I'm going to dip the pencil into the water. Now, can you see I'm only dipping the coloured bit into the water? Do not go in above that bit. Don't wet your wood if you can, because if you wet the wooden part of the pencil, what happens is it starts to warp. So if you keep dipping, like that, and the sort of the pencil becomes almost like a brush. Can you see? All right, dry it off when you're done. Get a piece of paper towel or something like that and dry off. So that is wet pencil end. Okay, what was the other one? I haven't got a knife, but I'm going to try and use a pair of scissors. Let's see if this works, right? So this is a nice one, but you need to leave your paper flat and you need to let it dry. So do this towards the end when you don't need to move it anymore. And I'm just going to shave. So this is better done with a knife, but this scissors is working actually quite well. I'm just shaving the ends off. Can you see? Shave the ends off. Ooh. Don't know whether you can see that happening. So it's just little speckles, and you can see the little speckles are sort of spreading. So you're just scraping off using, you could even use, if you've sharpened your pencils, you can use the bits of sharpenings, and that's really lovely. So that's sharp, I don't know how to describe it, shaved lead onto wet surface. All right, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. How do you mix a flesh colour? Right, so I've got a flesh colour here. already. But what happens if you haven't got one? What I would do is take a dark red. That's a dark reddy browny colour. Let's try that. Or maybe, yeah. And a bit of yellow. And I would put the yellow down first. Put the yellow down first, like this. And then add a touch, a really small amount of the red or the brown tone on top, like that. And then take your pen, you wash your water, and just again mix them on the paper. And you might find it's too yellow or it's too red or it's too whatever, but whatever colour it is, it might be ideal, which that is actually really quite nice. This is quite pink straight off the pencil, so it really depends what sort of flesh tone you want. So this was a dark red plus yellow, and it was a cadmium, so that's a warm yellow. Don't use lemon yellow, and this is just flesh tone, which is okay, but it's a bit pink to darken things up. So if you've got say a yellow, right, so we're going with this yellow again, and we want it to be a darker yellow. Don't add black and don't add white, right? Same with watercolour. So rather than adding black, think about it, add a little bit of brown instead. If you use a colour rather than black or white, you'll find that your colours remain rich. What happens when you add black and white is that you end up with a sort of dark, dull, matte tone, and it's just not very nice. So to darken colours, use other colours, not black or white. Okay, there you go. All right, so that's a little guide to watercolour pencils. Have a bit of fun, see how you go. I think I looked at my finished picture because I filmed the picture, the painting of the picture, and I realised that I used coloured pencils on some of the picture, so I had to go over them with watercolour pencils, and you'll see the finished product at the end of the session. Okay, so my pencils initially didn't move very well because they were coloured pencils and not watercolour pencils. Anyway, you'll understand when you see it. So make sure that the pencils you use are watercolour pencils, and also test them to see how well they move. Okay, hope that helps. Next bit you'll see my drawing ready. So following on from the drawing that we just did, I used it and I traced it through onto a sheet of A5 watercolour paper. It's just simple watercolour paper. It's nothing special. Just a medium weight, rough texture. You can do this in watercolour if you want to. You can do it in gouache, that also works really well and gives you the sort of texture that's on the original actually in gouache. And for those who don't know what gouache is, it's basically an opaque watercolour. So they add chalk into it and it sends it opaque instead of it being transparent. You can use a combination of watercolour and gouache. You could use coloured pens, you could use, I think the original of this one is actually a tapestry, and it would make a lovely tapestry. However, for today's demonstration I'm going to use watercolour pencils, and I've got a set here of Faber-Castell Faber-Castell water, because it's not Welsh. That's me, I've been in Wales too long I think. pencils. I was given these by one of my students. I generously get given materials to share and to keep in class, but because we're not in class, all my materials are now at home, and I thought I'd have a go with them. They're eco pencils, which I've just noticed, which means they're made from sustainable sources, which is absolutely brilliant. Quite why she didn't want to keep these, I don't know, but they're a really good make. Faber-Castell. There's lots of variety in this set. I mean, you know, we've got all of these colours, and they're decent. The problem we have with watercolour pencils is that you can't try them out before you buy them, and unless you go to an art shop, and then they have testers. But I've had very hit and miss experience with watercolour pencils. I've had brilliant ones from Tesco for £3 or £4. I've had one of my students brought in a set that had cost, I think, well over £20, and they just didn't work. So if you buy something, if it doesn't work, send it back, take it back, get a refund, buy something else. But these particular ones have been great so far, so I'm going to show you how to use them now, because some of you may or may not know how to use watercolour pencils. So the question is, do we put a colour in the background? And for the purpose of this exercise, I'm not going to do that. But what you could do, instead of just colouring the background in, is to just take some watercolour and colour the background in. That's if you want a coloured background. If you don't, forget about that. Put that down, dry it off thoroughly before you use these pencils, because you can actually dip these pencils into water and they work like a liquid watercolour, and you can use them in the way that I'm going to use them today, which is to effectively colour in and then add water on top. You can even shave little particles of the lead onto paper, and it sort of spreads. It's very nice. I might show you that later on, actually, or maybe I'll do a video and add it to the beginning. Anyway, you might have already seen that. That was an afterthought for me. Okay, so theory with watercolour, as always, is to start with the lightest tone first, and we've got this sort of strange, sort of pinky, fleshy. It's very similar to the tone that's on the face. Again, this very much depends on how your printer works, because my printer is very temperamental and will often print out colours that are different to the image. So, you know, you might find that this colour is actually a goldy colour. I mean, you would think that it would be more golden, really. And the other option is obviously to make up the colours yourself. Now, I don't know whether you can see, but the pencil lines here are very faint. And the reason that is because I drew it out. I traced it onto here from my original drawing. That was then heavy in lead, and then I took a putty rubber, and some of you may have these, some of you may not. And what I've done is I've just lightly rubbed out the lines as faint as I can see them, mainly because I don't want the lead to show through my pencil, watercolour pencil. So do that first. Obviously don't rub it out so you can't see it. If you want your colours to be brighter, so for example, if you wanted this to be a little bit more golden in tone, you can actually work these colours on top of one another. So I used a pinky flesh tone then, but I'm just going to work some orange over the top. So just use a light hand, hold your pencil about halfway down and use the side, because if you use the point, let me just get a scrap. If you use the point of a pencil and you press hard, you'll end up with lines like that. And the more you press into watercolour paper, the more likely the colour will sort of fall into the indentations that you make by being too heavy-handed. So a light touch here. To darken things up, rather than pressing harder, the best thing to do is to put a layer down and then go over the top in a different direction. That's called cross-hatching. So just a lightness of touch, and you'll keep it light if you hold your pencil halfway down. If you tend to go like this, then you tend to press a bit harder. Okay, so I'm going to use that tone again. Now, what happens if you don't have a flesh tone? So if you don't have a flesh tone in a pencil, then you can use a little bit of alizarin crimson or a red, and then just let the pencil be very thin. So just put it down really thinly, and what will happen is when you come to add the water, the colour will thin down and you'll just be left with a sort of a rosy pink tone rather than a red. So just don't colour it in too heavily. Okay, same with the hands. I'll tell you what, if I take one of my reds, I'll do a couple of different reds, because I've got a crimson, that's your sort of primary red. These have got numbers on them actually, so you can actually buy these. I don't know whether you can see that through there. This is a number 321. All right, so this is like a crimson, a cadmium red. So when I say light, I mean light, like this. Okay, really light, because once you've put the water on, you can see what colour it is, and then if you need it to be darker, you can go back over it. You can also add, because normally in watercolour you would add a yellow or something like that on top of this. So this is a number 326. This is like an alizarin crimson. It's slightly darker in tone. So again, let me see if, yeah, the finger comes over here like that. So nice and thin. Don't forget the thumb. Okay, and then you can take something like a cadmium yellow. This is a 307, and work the yellow over the top. Just give it a little bit of yellow tone, and you should find that that will create a face colour. That's a Caucasian face colour, that is. Other options are, you might have something like this in your set. You might have a yellow ochre or a raw sienna, something like that. You can always, just mix them up, see how you go. But they're the options. Now everything else is straightforward apart from the skin colour. So again, just lightly colour in each area like this. You can colour and add water, but my recommendation is that you colour, for this exercise, is you colour in and then add the water afterwards, just because you will enjoy it more if you do it this way. The other way around is a little bit more temperamental. Now, so in here we have a slightly darker area because it's inside, around the back of her veil. So like I said, just add a second layer. You can do this again after watering down, but obviously you need to dry it off before you put your second layer on. But this layer would be darker in here, cross hatch again. Cross hatching is a really good technique to use because you don't end up with lots of lines. And then going onto the veil. This outer section of the veil is, I don't know whether it's darker or it's just a different shade of blue. If you don't want to watch me do this, you can just fast forward it, because literally I'm just colouring this in. I mean, you know, some people just like watching, so you can just leave it on, have a cup of tea, watch me colour in. I was going to put it on time lapse, but I think I'll just keep it the way it is so I can keep chatting, because obviously if I put it on time lapse you don't hear my voice. Now did I, oh, I've gone into the hair. Right, can we rub this out? Yes, we can. So there you go. If you make a mistake, you can just lightly rub it out and go back and put the colour where it's supposed to go. It's the only problem with rubbing out your lines is that, you know, you can get lost in places. So the other option is, rather than drawing in pencil, this is a good tip, and I wanted to show you what to do if something went wrong. So remember the cross hatching if you need to make things darker is right. So maybe I've lost the outline of my hair, for example. So what you can do is, rather than drawing your original drawing in a pencil, if you know that your hair is going to be brown, you can draw in the watercolour pencil, and then you don't have the issue of having to rub things out, losing things, etc. This is a plait, a very long plaits coming down. Make them a little bit bobbly, they're not straight, so you can actually physically draw using your coloured pencils, your watercolour pencils. Remember, coloured pencils don't move, but watercolour pencils do. So circular motion like this for your plaits will give you a sort of feeling of a plaited piece of hair rather than a straight piece of hair. You can see how effective that is, and even up into the hair there. While you're at it, you can put some eyebrows on. Is there anything else that's brown? No. Or eyes. But I think because I've got the pleasure of having multiple colours in my set, I'm going to actually use them. So there are my eyes. Let's see now, we've got a black. Tend not to use black. Maybe use instead a sharp pencil. You could put that under her eyes as well. Okay, you could even put her nose in using the brown pencil instead of using a black, because a black is very flat. Same with her lips. Do not paint her lips in a bright red like she's got lipstick on. She hasn't got lipstick on. Use a shade of darker skin tone, so something like this one is a yellow ochre raw sienna colour 383, and that will give you a much more natural finish than putting red on those lips. Okay, and you can do shading as well with this on the skin, so you can put like shadows under there, cheekbones. Not that she's got cheekbones, but there you go. All right, she's got quite heavy eyes though, so maybe we can put in some red over here like this, just a little touch. Okay, and I mean that comes up all the way up here, but you could put that in afterwards maybe. I'm going to use the same red to outline. Now this bit here appears to be white, so what do you do with white in watercolour? Well, you would just leave the paper white. And if you make a mistake and you draw or paint over a white area, then the way you solve that is by adding some gouache. White watercolour tends to be really thin, and as a result doesn't sit very well on top of watercolour, so the only option is to use white gouache. You can get white pens. You do have white watercolour pens. Look, there's one here. Pencils. There. But they just are so thin that it's very difficult to tell if it's there or not. So down underneath, don't forget this bit around her necklace. In here. It's quite a mindful thing to do this. You know, we all like a bit of colouring in at times, but you know that at the end of this it won't look like a colouring in page. It'll look like an actual painting because we're going to put water on top of it. So again, don't worry if things aren't dark enough. Just keep going until you've nearly done with the colouring in. And again, like I said, just a lightness with your mark making, because that will, that cross is white, isn't it? I have to draw around that. Then you won't get too many hard lines. You'll see what I mean. Test your pencils out on a piece of paper first, and try pressing really hard and really soft, and you'll see that the marks made while pressing really hard are very different to the marks made doing the opposite. So just a nice, it's quite difficult for me because I'm quite heavy-handed. I'm sure some of you are. It's not easy to be light-handed. Nice, soft. You can see that the pencil picks up the texture of the watercolour paper. So it can be useful at times. It just depends what you're doing. In a face, it's not a useful thing to have too much texture. But in this instance, on the clothing, it might be quite good. So there we are. We've got her red in now. So what we need is another blue. Let's try, what have we got? That one. So again, don't worry if your colours don't match. Like I said, you can mix colours. Actually, I probably want a darker one than that. Mix colours up, you know, layer them, and you'll get different shades. I mean, it's almost like mixing paint, really. You know, if you sit yellow on top of red, you'll get orange. Different blues will give you greens if mixed with yellow, and so on. You could do a little colour mixing swatch before you do this, so you know what you're dealing with. And again, just leave the edge broken. Don't just draw a straight line. A lot of my students, they go straight across like that and it looks like it's been cut out then. So leave a sort of jagged bottom. It looks much more natural than a straight edge. And there we go, nearly done. So we just got the house to do. So the house is, well, it's a little chapel or a church or whatever it is. It's grey. So I'm just going to colour in the inner sections. It looks like one of the little houses. I watched the Great Pottery Throwdown. I love the pottery throwdown yesterday. And they made little slab houses and lighthouses and buildings out of clay, and they were so lovely. And then they lit them from inside, and there was a beautiful one of the mines down in Cornwall, I think it is. Really lovely. So there we are. Oh, there's a little bit there. Don't forget these little gaps. Really important. Now I'm going to leave the writing just for a moment. And do I have some water? Yes, I do. Okay, let's get some water on this. So you want a brush that's appropriate to the size of what you're working on. So I've got a couple of detail brushes here so that I can go in with around the face, because the face needs to be really carefully done. Whereas the rest of it can be, you know, it's not as important, should I say. Right, okay, so we've got in here. Let's start, well, let's start with the face. Mainly because it's in the middle and it might be nice just to see what happens with this colour. So on with the water and just start to smooth it. And you can see as the water absorbs, give it a little bit of time. Sometimes these colours, they move immediately, and sometimes they take a little bit of time just to get going. It depends on the tone of the pencil that you're using, and also on how much over cross hatching you've done. So I'm going to smooth the eyes in, but I'm not going to touch the actual eyeballs. So you can see that it's just moving very faintly and starting to blend. You won't see it as much on the pale colours as you do on the darker ones, but with watercolour it's really important that we work light to dark. Okay, continue with that, working light to dark. Okay, so now we go into this headdress. Excuse me. And we can start, if we just apply water over the whole thing like this. And wet it down, let it absorb, and then you can start pushing it about. And all it does is it blends it together, it softens it up, and you can see it moving. I'm hoping that you can see this. I mean, you know, you may have used watercolour pencils before, so you don't really need to watch me do this. But this is just for people who haven't used watercolour pencils. Let's go into this inner section here and just put some water on and start to smooth it in. So I hope you're all coping with this as you're watching me do this. I hope you're all coping with this lockdown. I know that the injections have started going out. This one's not moving very well, actually. Like I said, you know, your pencil may or may not move very well. Some of the colours may and others might not. So don't get frustrated if you find that some of the tones are a little bit more difficult to move than others. But you can see the difference between that side and that side, can't you? It is moving, but it's just not moving a great deal. So wet it. Oops. Trying to keep the colours in the right places is the thing. Just wet it down and just start to rub. And it should start to move for you. So if I just show you what this does, if you put the pen, the colour onto, I don't know which colour I used on that bit. Did I use that bit? Let's have a look. So it's wet, this surface. And you can see if it's wet, it does sort of, and you can also dip your pencil into your water, but don't just dip the very end in. Try not to dip the wood in, because if you dip the wood in, the wood gets wet and it might warp a little bit. But you can see that will add more colour to that area if you wanted it to. If you wanted it to be darker, you can add more colour in, okay? So let's try the blue now. Let's try the outer bit. See if this moves a little bit better than the rest. So I'm just going to put the water on. Get the water on. So your pencils might be a bit better than mine, but they are moving a little bit. They're not moving as much as I thought they would, but they are moving. Same on that side. Plenty of water on there. Again, if you want to, just take the colour, dip it into the water. If you want it to be stronger, just keep dipping it in and you can carry on working into that. All I'll say about working into a wet surface is just be gentle. There. You can see that's darkening up nicely now. Just be a bit, I mean, it really, again, it depends on the thickness of your paper, but just be a little bit more gentle than you would be on dry paper. There. Okay. Let's have a go at the hair. You can just leave things, you know, you don't have to colour everything in. Well, you don't have to wet everything down, should I say. You know, you can leave things just as coloured pencil. It's up to you. going to take a bit of that grey. Just going to add a little bit more density because these are coming up quite thin. I'm just going to add on top of the water and also dipping into my water with the pencil itself, a little bit more density to the colour. And is the door, yeah, the doorway is black, and I do have a black, but I tend not to use it very often. But in this instance, maybe it will be beneficial to put some black in there, like that. The other thing you can do is outline this little cross, just so it stands out a bit. I didn't paint round it very carefully, so I just need to get that to stand out a bit, like that. Okay. Now the hands. So with the hands, I'm going to wet them. So water on. And then I'm going to take a brown, or you know, you could probably do a reddy brown colour. And I'm just going to define where the gaps are in the hands and underneath the thumb, like this. A little bit of a shadow maybe around here. The lines in between, like that. I mean, again, it's really down to how much detail you want on your picture as to how much detail you go into. But you get what I'm doing. I'm going to put this now on time lapse. I think I've been talking for long enough, half an hour. And I'm just going to finish it off really quickly. And literally, you just take your pencil, make sure it's nice and sharp to do the writing with.